Hi everyone, thanks for joining us today and welcome to our latest webinar on patient engagement and retention in real-world studies. So I'm Anna Richards, Commercial Lead at Vitaccess, and I'll be moderating today. I'm joined by Mark Larkin, CEO, and Sam Llewellyn, Senior Consultant at Vitaccess. And we have a special guest today, Tom Smith, who is Life Science Public Engagement Specialist. Thank you so much for coming on today, Tom. So just as a little background for everyone, we've got Mark, who's got over 20 years of experience in consulting. He specialises in European pricing and reimbursement. When he founded Vitaccess, he sought to blend scientific expertise and technology to better represent the patient voice in drug development and market access. We got Sam as well. So Sam leads the design, development and implementation of our patient-centred research projects. And he has a focus on both qualitative and quantitative methodologies. And our special guest, Tom. So Tom has a wealth of experience. He's a member of the European Health Parliament, UPATI Fellow, and he also works with patient organisations all over Europe. He's been working with regulatory bodies like the European Medicines Agency as an expert patient reviewer, and the Health Research Authority as a member of the Research Ethics Committee. There is far more to Tom as well, but we haven't got all day. But thank you so much, Tom, for joining us. So over the next 35 minutes, we'll be covering the following key learning outcomes. So how can patient input can transform into meaningful patient engagement? How to measure engagement? Examples of real-world patient retention strategies, and what benefits can patient engagement bring to a study? But first, I'm just going to show you a little bit about us, and we'll start off today with an intro of Vitaccess before we move into the topic, and this will be followed by a Q&A session, so you can put forward your questions to us using the Q&A box on the side panel. If you have any questions, just throw them at us at any point, ready for the Q&A part. So who are we? We are a patient-centric research organisation. Our speciality is in real-world primary data collection, so from patients, caregivers and clinicians with a digital focus. These 5 complementary core capabilities allow us to give a collaborative approach when conducting global digital research. So from concept to implementation, we've got this general real-world data and insights through creative patient-centric solutions. And we can do this through the Vitaccess Real platform. So that comprises the data capture tool and the real-time research portal to see how the data once it's collected. And here you've got the flow from the participant data capture, so patient, clinicians, and caregivers. And then in the center here, the modules that enable collection of the granular data. So this type of architecture allows the studies to be started up to 10 times faster. So you can see the outputs in real time. But that's enough on that. I'm going to pass over to the experts to tell you more, starting with Sam.
Thank you very much, Anna. Hopefully you can hear me okay. Obviously, focus of the webinar today is talking about retention and engagement in real-world studies. Both are in play throughout a study, and there's, it's often quite difficult to distinguish between the two, and there's a lot of crossover. So I've not got it on the slide here, but retention's a bit more common when we think about real-world studies, keeping them in the study. Actually, sort of what we're going to focus on mostly here is this, engagement in the studies as well. So, I've got up on the slide here two different types of engagement that we can observe and do observe in our typical real-world studies. So attrition, participants actually leaving the study or being lost to follow-up. So particularly with longitudinal studies where there's multiple data collection time points, say, monthly over 2 years, actually, losing those participants when it comes to month 2, a year later we look and we can measure attrition. We can see how many we've lost in 12 months compared to baseline. And then the other type, completion. So not necessarily the same denominator, but of participants who are coming back and completing study activities, how many of them are completing those. So again, using that sort of 12-month reference point, compared to baseline, how many of the, say, 100 participants who completed a baseline have then come back at month 12 and completed, study activities there. And then sort of, I don't know, one of the more interesting bits then that we're going to talk about here is getting patient input. So sorry, if we could move on to the next slide, Anna. Sorry, my fault. So yeah, when we think about ways to, and we'll come to this a bit more in some case studies that Mark's going to take you through in a bit, but when we think about ways that we can maximize retention and engagement in our real-world studies, a key part of that is making sure we get prospective participants, in most cases patients, but also it could be caregivers or clinicians as well if there's a clinician-reported element to a study. But for the sake of this, we're going to focus on patient input, but it's getting that patient input into various things throughout the study life cycle. So they're just going to appear up on the slide now, and I think sort of I'll go through them quickly for the sake of it, but input in study design. So UI UX is user interface, user experience design, and user acceptance testing. So when there's something in a study available for testing, materials, a smartphone app, a web-based survey platform, getting input there. Again, we're looking at sort of, linked to that, reviewing of patient-facing materials, interim analyses, publications. So, I'm listing them there, but actually what we wanted to do here was sort of, Tom, to get some of your input here on, what are your thoughts? I know that you've been sort of historically pulled into real-world studies at various points, in this diagram, but yeah.
Thank you very much, Sam, and thank you, Anna, for the introduction. I'm not actually that boring, believe it or not. But anyway, moving on. So I'm going to just trot through these with a bit more sort of granular detail. And so I'll start right at the beginning with the input with study design and protocol. And crucially, we need to kind of speak to the patient community about what they want in exchange for participation. Right at the beginning, when we co-design the study protocol, we need to sort of co-design the rewards as well. Excuse me. I think you can do that. You can have your sort of pre-launch workshop and get this kind of, in black and white almost, what people want out of it. And clearly, if you try and give people what they want within reason, obviously there are compliance issues and stuff like that, then you're not going to keep hold of everybody all the time, but you are going to keep hold of more people. And crucially, I think when you engage the patient community to try and set out exactly what you want to do, why and how, you really need, often overlooked, you really need to try and engage different kinds of patients to paint a full picture. So I think obviously you need to have individual patients and their supporters. These are people who focus on their disease, they kind of live their life, they don't really look kind of too much outside of it, which is obviously absolutely fine. We have patient advocates who do advocate for the needs and interests of our disease community. We have patient organization representatives who push the interests of their patient organization or their employer in this case. And then we have patient experts and consultants like me. And if you have all of those kinds of people involved in the process, then you're going to get a comprehensive image about what people want to need. But also, crucially, in my opinion, this biases things equally in all directions, because if you try and if you don't have the full spectrum of people involved, it's going to be an absolute nightmare to try and mitigate the bias. So I think it's just easier to bring everybody in and balance it that way. Moving on to design and user testing. For me, this is an absolute bare minimum, and it's very, very important. I think it's very important to test the platform with the people that actually use it, and then try and make the changes that the people that actually are going to use it want. And I think, many years ago, before I found kind of patient engagement, I used to work for a web design company. And I don't know if it's that or something else, but how things look is so important. Because even before kind of it being intuitive to use, because that's your first impression, isn't it? You kind of you open an app and you're hit with, you know, the colors, the layout and things like that. So I can't stress enough how important it is to make products that people actually want to look at and use. And I think throughout the course of a real world evidence study, we need to try and, we can't just sort of invite this feedback, action it, and then forget about it. We need to periodically, you know, create the space or channels for people to feedback about issues they're having with the platform or not. You know, even if there's nothing to do, that's worth finding out as well. And I think what happens is if you involve people periodically on matters like this, it keeps them in the orbit of the study. You know, it keeps them sort of connected to it and invested in it somewhat. And also there is the obvious moral imperative of engaging people as equals and valuing what they have to say about different aspects of a study. So social media and patient webinars. Word of mouth is always going to be the most effective form of communication, because, you know, it's just, if you have a disease, then, you know, if somebody from your particular set of circumstances, in my case, another CF patient, for example, it means if somebody vouches for the importance of a study, or if it's fun to participate or whatever, that means an awful lot more than either someone from a different disease community or somebody that I've never met before. So I just think it's really important to sort of, you know, establish, build and maintain that relationship where possible. And if you have strong ties to the patient community, then that's going to come with its own ecosystem of conferences and opportunities to integrate research and disseminate findings and things like that. I think review of patient-facing materials is extremely important. And obviously, you know, with plain language, it's kind of exploding at the moment. We are doing more and more and more of this. But it's almost like the user interface testing and design and stuff like that. We need to look at, is the language totally appropriate? And crucially, is it compatible with accessibility software and hardware, depending on the needs of your sort of patient community? But finally, you know, do you actually want to look at it? If you were to develop a plain language summary, and it's, you know, plain language and it's incredibly technical, and it's, you know, 8,000 words long or something like that, you know, with the best will in the world, no one's going to actually want to look at it. And this is something that actually happens, especially when it comes, I mean, we're sort of dragging it off into informed consent, but working for the rec, you know, sometimes you do get participant information sheets and informed consent documents that are 7,000 and 8,000 pages long, which neither inform or meaningfully consent either. And review of interim analysis. Good, bad, or indifferent, your participants, your patient cohort, need to know what's going on. They deserve to know that, which again reinforces retention, rather than just kind of thinking, okay, thanks for that data, whatever, see you later, you know, we're focusing on this now or whatever. The grown-ups are going to go and do this kind of thing. You know, I just think we need to engage people as equals, because obviously, again, from a moral point of view, they have tremendous value to offer, but also commercially, technically, scientifically, you know, patients are people with rich skills and backgrounds. And moving on finally to publication, develop your lay-friendly materials as much as you can, and then give that to the patient community to review, you know, to give feedback on, to critique. Because I think it's possible, I work a lot with plain language, and I think it's possible to almost have like this osmosis effect. I think it's possible to create a plain language document which is ridiculously easy to read, and almost by accident, just by reading through it, without thinking too much, you can grasp these meaningful, you know, potentially polemic, difficult ideas. Also, I think we should, where possible and as much as appropriate, invite participants to be co-authors. And this is going to strengthen the relationships that I've mentioned, and again, makes them feel valued. And that's all I've got to say about it.
Tom, a quick question for you. I was really interested when you mentioned about the the research ethics side of things, and when you have a really 7,000-8,000 page word document that actually it doesn't really give meaningful consent, or similarly with a patient information briefing, that's simply won't brief the patient possibly. In those circumstances, have you been involved in situations where the ethics folks are actually pushing back in that similar way? So you may have materials that are factually correct, but actually in some ways not fit for purpose, because actually they're not designed for the patient.
Honestly, it's a divisive issue, and I think sometimes the more specialised a member of a rec can be, the more they can disagree with making it lay friendly, and that's just my experience, by the way. And it's just it's bonkers, because like you say, scientifically they hold water, but more important than that is that they are legally bulletproof. And you might be an experienced and qualified lawyer, looking to enroll in a study or trial, but the odds are that you're probably not. And even if you are, you're not going to want to read something which is 7,000 or 8,000 pages long to find out exactly what's happening. And this is true, especially with vulnerable groups and with people who, for example, might be at end of life kind of situation, and it might be a Hail Mary, and you can't. I think it's about power dynamic, not necessarily physician to patient, but more just like, I'm in a bad situation here. Personally, I think I would sign anything that might give me a chance. And I wouldn't know exactly what I was signing up for at all.
Yeah, and I guess it takes longer. It's a more difficult thing to start off with something that's 7,000 words long, and develop something that actually has the essence of what is required and fulfills the compliance requirements, but says it in a far simpler way. That's a more difficult thing to do than simply to stay at the higher level of detail.
Yeah, it's not an enviable task, that's for sure. But so much of health research, drug development, none of it's easy, and I think that we have to get it done, or even if we create kind of lay summaries of informed consent forms, maybe like a 3-page wonder or 1-page wonder, which would say something like, within the realms of kind of technical legal definitions, we've done our best to represent accurately what all this legal boring guff says. However, it's still a factor, it's still an issue.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree with all of this, with the legal background as well, knowing that, the reality is that the focus is on the patient, and really everyone being able to understand things as clearly as possible. And I could imagine actually it'd be interesting to see some research into engagement just from that period of reading through informed consent that are pages and pages long, and whether you get a quick drop off just from that.
Yeah, that's something we could do, right, Anna? I mean, we haven't looked
Exactly.
into that, but with the digital studies that we do, we have the sort of metadata about the engagement of participants, basically everything they do. So not just the actual data, but how long you might be on a certain screen. So we could do that. We could look at, across different studies, how long people take to read through the informed consent, and whether that varies by study, by age, by, you name it.
Exactly.
But,
There's different points of measurement of that engagement. I'm gonna I think pass over to Sam, who's going to talk about measuring engagement at this point.
Yeah, thanks, Anna. So yes, it's more just to sort of give a bit of context then to any sort of numbers that Mark or we may jump in with as well. We're going to present during the case studies. We just kind of wanted to give a background to measuring engagement. So So obviously, very much dependent on the study design, what you would say and measure as engagement between a cross-sectional web-based survey, say, and a longitudinal study are quite different things. And also sort of before that, and less so for a cross-sectional survey, say, we were just asking participants to register consent in a study and just provide that cross-sectional data is more so for the longitudinal studies, is actually first defining participants who are active in the study and therefore impressionable to anything that we then implement in the study to try and address engagement. So, this is something we see quite a lot. We've had studies now running for 4 or 5 years, and it's kind of linked to what we were just talking about on the previous slide as well, about sort of actually how's the registration process, because what we see is a number of participants will, for one reason or another, they might download a smartphone study app that we've developed that we do as typical for our digital studies, but not proceeded to provide any data. So, it could be for various reasons, but the important bit for what we're discussing here is that actually when you're looking at engagement, you can't include as the denominator that full number of participants who have downloaded the app, because there's nothing you can do at that point to impress upon those participants that you've lost at that point. So I think it's then just on the next slide. Yeah, thanks, Anna. Is I guess just to give some examples of different types of engagement that we could focus on in these studies and attempt to address. So I've already covered the cross-sectional, so this could be percentage of participants completing, or just percentage of overall surveys that have been completed by participants in a study. Whereas for longitudinal, quite typical for our studies as well, where we're trying to again build something that's going to be useful for the participants as well. It's not just to have, here's all these surveys, we want all this data. It's here's actually some features that would benefit participants as well, and some of that can be based on as is typical, is based on feedback that we've had from patients and caregivers. So things like a symptom tracker. So examples I've got here, it could be percentage of completed PRO instruments at each survey completion window. So if we're asking surveys and PRO instruments to be completed every 2 months, actually, if we're looking at engagement, how many, and again, sort of to come back to what I was talking about earlier as well, how many have completed baseline, how many have completed month 2, etc., all the way up to, what some studies we're doing are into their 5th year now, how many are coming back and completing a PRO instrument at 5 years versus 1 year. And then again, coming back more to these sort of patient-driven features and data collection activities, it could be things like background surveys. Participants might complete those at baseline. This is data that's unlikely or not expected to change much during the course of a longitudinal study, but nevertheless could change. And we might prompt participants to just check in on details and just update if there's anything that needs updating there. So it could be something like that. We might expect that percentage to be much lower based on the frequency of the check-ins and the type of data it is. But then we've also got things like a symptom tracker. So this could just be something that a participant can freely go in and contribute to daily, weekly, monthly. And so again, comparing it to these other types of study engagement, it might be a lot lower. Participants might not want to use that feature. So when we look at these participants, it's not necessarily, oh, this, the symptom tracker is really low, we need to address engagement with that feature. It could be, well, but that is lower because of the type of feature it is. And actually, if you look at PRO instrument completion, it could be as high as 100% completion for a study. And we've seen that. And I'll let Mark talk about this a bit more in the context of the study. But, we ran a study with a 90-day daily data capture, and we saw participants in that study complete 100% of 90 days of daily data capture. So it's possible. You're not always just expecting some lower number and trying to address it. It could be as high as 100%. And as you're seeing, even in a short data collection period, how do you keep it 100%? And that's not to say that there isn't anything that you need to do on those studies just because it starts at 100%.
Yeah, and Sam, just to add on to that,
yeah.
I mean, what you've described there is quite different, sophisticated designs of longitudinal studies. So the summary is really that there's not really one measure of engagedness that may be useful from a monitoring perspective for a longitudinal study, that you could then decide if action needs to be taken to address poor engagement, for instance. You need to go into the detail, and that's probably a lot different from many people's perspective and experience on, for instance, interventional trials, where you might say, well, at a certain point, how many people are still on treatment during people are a lot more familiar with that, perhaps.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. So just really quickly on the next slide, because we'll get to the case studies. I think having more context with them makes sort of what we talk about a bit more interesting. But just quickly, here is just an example of engagement in the sense of overall survey completions in a study from launch to when we introduced an incentives framework. So the arrow's pointing to it there. This was in August 2019. We implemented a rewards framework. So you can see that actually when the study launched, engagement in terms of number of survey completions was quite high. It dipped then sort of, 1 year to a year and a half into the study, back up then for when rewards were introduced. We've highlighted there that there was again a bit of a dip just at the start of the COVID-19 pandemic. But actually we've seen that sort of subsequently recover, and to the end of that study, engagement in terms of survey completions, which resulted in charitable donations as the form of rewards, was actually pretty good compared to how we started out with the study, and a lot better than it dipped to prior to the implementation of rewards. But yeah, we'll come to that quickly in the context of another study. So the only other thing from me, and again, these will be covered a bit more in some case studies, but just wanted to acknowledge some examples of common strategies to address retention and engagement that we implement here at Vitaccess, and get in touch to discuss these, because we could talk to you about them for hours, I'm sure. And I think we did joke about that when we were talking about the content for these slides. We could easily have a whole webinar on each of these if we really wanted to. But yeah, so yeah, rewards I've acknowledged on the previous slide. Again, sort of coming back to that patient input as well, webinars. So this could be, disseminating initial findings from the study, or just educating prospective or existing participants about the study, just to, keep people in the study and engaged. Data nuggets. So what we mean here is sort of, and again, linked to the analysis, is presenting participants with high-level patient-centric findings that are coming out of the study. So just enough. And we implemented these on our studies based on feedback we'd received, where it's like, we want to hear about what's happening to our data, not from a not necessarily from a GDPR perspective, but just what are you doing with it? Is it interesting? Is it good data? Why should I keep providing data on these monthly surveys 3 years into a study? What are you finding? And so we actually really enjoy putting these together and putting them out, and tend to get really positive feedback from people on those. Yeah, survey reminders, again, sort of as Tom was saying, with the study materials, really stressing things and making it clear, the importance of the study, and coming back and completing surveys. Why should someone do this? Is it clear why a participant in a study needs, why is it important? What impact does it have on them? Is that related to rewards, treatments? Yeah, sort of just, the availability of evidence in the literature. What are they contributing to? Why should they care? So stressing that up front is quite important as well. Newsletters, again, linked to sort of data nuggets and webinars. Making sure participants are kept up to date on study features that might be implemented based on feedback they've given. We've had that before, where we've implemented features based on feedback that participants have given, let them know that, this is based on stuff that you have suggested. So if you've got other things that you'd like to suggest that we didn't pick up when we were doing the initial study design for one, for better or worse reasons, it could just be that, they weren't included in the cohort that were providing study design. That's not to say that their input is then no longer needed. So yeah, making sure that's disseminated. And then final one we wanted to address here was, again, just sort of, patient data feedback. So again, this is all just sort of tying in with the data nuggets and the newsletters as well. But as we do analysis, proper formal analyses as well, it's disseminating that as well and sharing feedback that we've had from other prospective or existing participants.
And Sam, some of that accords with what Tom was saying, right? If you're going to engage with people, there's basically an implicit or explicit bargain with people. You can't engage with them and then, or you shouldn't, and then they get you some really good feedback and then you don't act on it, or you sit on it. I mean, that's potentially even more damaging than not engaging with them in the first place, I would say. Tom, would you agree?
Yeah. Oh, perfect. Someone's at the door. Yeah, no, I would definitely agree with that. And I think that, the way things are done at the moment is largely because patients are supposed to feel grateful to have the opportunity to contribute to health research in their disease area, which, as far as I can tell, is complete nonsense. Because most people, they're just living their lives. They're not hanging on every single development within their sort of therapeutic area. So I think obviously it can be difficult. It can be something to pick around, but I think we should reward people for contributing to it, because the simple fact of the matter is that contributing data to other people or other companies, and saying, oh, you might benefit from this in 3 or 4 years' time if we develop something off the back of it. It's just kind of nonsense, really.
Yeah. Absolutely. So a couple of case studies to take you through, each of which is quite different. So this first one I'm going to take you through is about, as you see, longitudinal study in a rare disease. Now, as this was longitudinal, quite a long-term study, what we did was implement a whole range of engagement tools, if you like. So you see the objective there that I'm not going to read out, but it's essentially to understand the burden of this rare disease. And as a couple of the instances we've mentioned, participants provide data via sort of PRO instruments, other types of surveys over a couple of years using their own, it's a bring your own device study. And here are the strategies we employed. Now, crucially, for all of these ones, I would say that the part of the value of these was they were tailored to the study cohort. So to echo what Tom was saying, it's diseases are different. So the more tailored and specific you can be to the cohort, the better. So we established a scientific advisory board, patients on that as well as clinicians to help us advise on these strategies. I mean, we had some ideas, but we're not the experts on the disease. Within the study app, there were profile and tracker pages that enable people to keep a record of their disease management that they could use themselves in addition to being useful for the data capture for the study. So as those were useful, we got high completion rates, or suggestive of the fact that they were useful. And then Sam mentioned the data nuggets. So we produced those, and this is a global study, so it's obviously important to localize those into people's relevant languages, and they were distributed via the patient associations who we partnered with for this study. And then adaptive monitoring. Some of these things enable us to, as we're doing studies digitally, we can monitor things. So don't come back in 2 years, without monitoring and look at your data and say, well, I've got some problems here with engagement. If you have the ability to monitor regularly, do so and take remedial action if there are problems. So one of the things we did for this study is actually reduce some of the participant load in terms of the data capture to focus on the types of the data which were the highest priority. So we did that as a result of the monitoring. And then look, rewards. We've talked about this, but actually this was an interesting study where we didn't have rewards right from the beginning, but we did implement them again as part of the adaptive monitoring. And we saw a pretty significant impact of of those of the implementation of that. So, you know, people are, when we talk with sponsors, we have a pretty big repertoire now of how the impact of rewards, and this was a nice example where actually within the same study, you know, you can see the before and after impact of rewards. And again, in terms of return on investment, it's really attractive for doing these. So the benefits, I mean, you know, we've talked about a lot of different strategies here, and I suppose the bottom line is these different strategies, they take time, they take resources to get patients engaged. Why would you do that? Well, you do that because you get better, you know, at one level, you get better data. So here we had a granular global data set that's being used for health technology assessments and publications, and also improved the relationships that the sponsor had with a whole range of patient advocacy groups and key opinion leaders in their rare condition. And, you know, that's not without its value as well, of course. So another case study, this is also a longitudinal study, but it's a far shorter one. So that impacts the way we think about engagement for over the time course of the study. So if you go to the next one, this is to capture burden and health-related quality of life information on patients with a very rare disease, an ultra-rare disease in the US and in Europe. Data capture is really ambitious. So this is daily data. I mean, Sam alluded to this one, daily data capture over a period of 90 days, where we, and actually within each day, it wasn't just a single piece of data capture. There were multiple surveys that participants had to complete. So actually pretty ambitious and granular data capture for the participants who were actually patients themselves or caregivers. And the strategies, the key strategy we employed actually was a reward program. Now, just to give you some insight into this, we got input from patients about how this should be structured, and there's some differences between countries, for instance. And we had a sort of in-app currency that linked to specific actions that we hoped they would do. So not simply here's some rewards, at the end of 90 days, you will get it. Actually, each day you get feedback on the way, you know, the progress you're making, the things that you're doing. You accrue an in-app currency, it's stars in this case, and you can see how many you're accruing. And then after a certain period, I think it was monthly or may have been shorter, you can cash out, you can get those. So, you know, not a too distant benefit, even though it was only a 90-day study. That we found that was with feedback from participants that worked really well, and they liked the fact there were immediate or proximal ways to get their rewards. So as we measured those benefits in terms of engagement, actually we got pretty nice engagement rates. Here it was 45, you know, around 45% people, participants who completed the daily PRO instruments, which you see there. And actually we found, interestingly, within the cohorts, and it was an ultra-rare disease, so it wasn't a huge cohort, there's a subgroup of participants who we called super users, who actually did phenomenal completion rates over the period of 90 days. You know, it was almost as if we'd engage very nicely with them, and they'd pretty much do anything we asked them to within reason, with a really high level of engagement, which we found, you know, really satisfying, having built that and tailored it to that cohort. And then finally, yeah, as I said there, that's about 1/4 of those participants are those really engaged participants. So I think that's about it. And Anna, back to, oh no, I'll take you through this one as well. Apologies, this is my last one. So if you just to summarize the takeaways that we've taken you through, what we think is important for this is we've talked about how participant input can be transformed into meaningful engagement. So the overarching part of that is around study co-creation, engaging. The more you engage with your participants, the more they will engage with you. Is probably a nice summary. And do it early, do it regularly. Then we talked about the differences between cross-sectional and longitudinal data capture. We can talk a lot more about that, particularly longitudinal. If anyone wants to talk about that in more detail, please get in touch, because we've got quite a nice level of expertise on that. We talked about different strategies that you see there, rewards, feeding back to patients. They always want to know, tell me how the study's going, tell me how my input has been valuable. Testing, of course, notifications, and simplicity. Look, most patients aren't scientific experts. It's really easy to get caught up in the science and overcomplicate things. That's a mistake. And then finally, what does that mean? What are the benefits of that? Well, fulfilled participants is always good. I mean, in any other situation, in any other industry, if you're doing anything with your customers or clients, you want to keep them satisfied. It's the same here. You're engaging with a group, you're asking them to do things. If they're fulfilled and satisfied, that's good news. You get, if so, less attrition, less missing data, more granular data sets, and hopefully the cohort themselves actually could be potentially a valuable, just in sort of business terms, resource. If you've got a really valuable, really engaged cohort, that's extremely valuable.
Fabulous. Thank you so much. I hope you didn't feel any pressure there, Mark, because I was a little prompt for time.
No,
so
sorry.
We're a little bit over, but we really want to get to the Q&A because we've had a lot of questions come through. And we'll try and get through them all. If we don't, we'll get back to you. So thanks for putting your name against the question, and we'll email you as well afterwards. I'm going to put forward the first one, which is a two-parter. So do you ever explore directly with participants the reasons why they're not engaged in a study, and how would you go about doing this?
Yeah, I can take that maybe, and Sam might have some. Well, it'd be interesting if Tom had some input on that. So we try to. Now, it can be difficult though. So at an extreme, if a participant is completely unengaged, it's actually quite difficult to contact them to find out why they haven't. Remember also, we are constrained as to how we interact with participants based on, we can't ethically go and hassle them. So from an ethics perspective, we describe how we will run the study and how we will engage with patients. So we can't be doing things outside of that. So having said that, in several instances and several studies, we've had workshop sessions where we've talked to the participants about their engagement and why, for any reasons why they may not have found studies particularly engaging. Sam or Tom, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I can go. Yeah, I'd just add as well that it's something that, as a sort of patient-centered research organization, is something that we really care about this, and are invested in making sure that what we're doing on our studies is of most benefit and is going to lead to good engagement as well. So we're also doing sort of above study investigations into this. So this could be in internal pieces of research where actually we're going out to participants with no specific condition, but just sort of any chronic condition that is in theory a participant in a future study, and getting that type of feedback on data nuggets, newsletters, rewards, getting that kind of feedback, because otherwise it's sort of as Mark says, we've done workshops on some studies, and then when it comes to a new study and the sponsor's asking about what rewards framework would you propose based on other stuff you've done, well, that was a very specific rewards framework. Say with the case studies that Mark showed, they were successful in those disease areas, but that's not to say that it would work in another disease area as well. And so a part of that we're trying to address is to arm ourselves for those discussions, is to try and have some above disease, above study feedback that we can draw on, because there's not really much out there on that, let alone just on general rewards framework guidance, and that kind of shows when we start discussing these studies with sponsors as well, but always something that we're happy to discuss.
I think
sorry, go on, Tom.
we also need to reward bad feedback. as in not poor quality feedback, but feedback about things that aren't great. Because, you know, we're all sort of here speaking publicly, I suppose. We are confident people, but I think we just need to create a space for participants to feel comfortable saying what they did like and what they didn't like. And again, yeah, we need to incentivize them to, you know, give that feedback to us and reward them for it.
Definitely. I've got actually there's two-part question. It's two different people, but there's quite a link between them. So one is about how do ethics committees view participant payments? And we also have a question that's just come in about when you're introducing incentives. So I'm assuming introduction of incentives during a longitudinal study, so not from the initial phase. Do you need to go back to the ethics committee for approval?
So I can definitely answer the first one. I think you'd be surprised how little we see it. So far, the vast majority of times, people are compensated for, you know, their travel to site, so to speak, for clinical trials and stuff like that. But the thing is, if it's not persuasive, they shouldn't have an issue with it. And I think that this is how things should be done anyway. But not to throw mud at my beloved colleagues at the HRA, but I'm sure anyone who's submitted an ethical application before knows how inconsistent recs can be. But really, that kind of thing really comes down to the personal affectation and demeanor of the chair. It's very, very variable. So yeah, it's a good thing to do. It has to be, if you are thinking of submitting an application for reward with including rewards, you know, do your level best to make sure that it's kind of doesn't come across as persuasive or inducement in any way, really.
Yeah. And Sam, would you be okay to answer the second half? So the introducing incentives to then improve engagement, do you have to then resubmit for ethics approval?
Yeah, so, you know, I'd say I'm sure there's some exceptions to this, but almost always would we run that back by the ethics committee. So quite typical on our studies, you know, global studies, there's multiple different ethics committees, IRBs involved here. And, you know, what one country's ethics committee might be really strict, you know, you need to do this, whereas another country's, you know, you only need to raise, like, say, what they might list as definitions of sort of major amendments, and maybe you could not raise this to them, but actually if you're doing something in one country, it makes complete sense to do it in all of the other countries as well. So why not flag it, unless you think that that's a concern and it would result in the study then subsequently being rejected. But it's not just that you're adding rewards, and part of this comes back to, it should be really clear to participants what they are being rewarded or, you know, compensated for. And that involves, you know, updating the consent document, updating the reminder emails that goes to them to tell them that there's new surveys. You know, it's all coming back to this engagement as well. It's not just, oh, there's just, you know, rewards would suddenly appear in the study, or they'd suddenly receive an email to say, like, you know, thank you for 2 years. Did you know there was actually, you know, these rewards involved, and here's your vouchers. It's actually being really upfront and transparent about all of those. And, you know, I'm sure this is sort of, in your experience of where you've seen this come up, but not necessarily enough, Tom, is that transparency. Like, participants should know everything that they are doing and expected to do, and the benefits that has for them, whether that's, you know, contributing to the research or the rewards. And so, to answer that question, yes, you know, we would almost certainly always advocate for going back and making sure that's acknowledged. I guess also just what sort of is another thing to consider is the other type of rewards, which is actions monitored in the background resulting in charitable donations. And so actually, where we've done this on a few studies, we have always run that through ethics. But I guess just thinking about maybe what are some sort of more gray areas that we would explore a bit on a project by project basis, is that, you know, our actions in the study, you know, resulting in things as well. But, you know, in most cases, why, if a participant is doing something and it has a positive benefit, such as charitable donations, would you not want participants to know that, and therefore update the materials and consult and get input to the point that then you would do an ethics amendment, because you would be revising the materials.
Yeah, thank you. I'm going to have to call time because we're having some amazing questions through, but we can't answer them all today, and I've kind of cheekily gone over by about 10 minutes. So I want to thank everyone for sending in their questions. We'll try and get back to everyone individually as well afterwards. I wanted to say a huge thank you for Mark, Sam, and especially Tom for joining us today. And to quickly tell you that next month we're actually doing a short course at ISPOR, and I'm just going to share the link on the chat right now, so you can register if you're interested. So they are 2-hour sessions across the 7th and the 8th of December, and that'll be Mark, Catherine, and Casey who will be talking in that be running that workshop. So yeah, so thank you again. We hope to see you next time. Have a good one.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Cheers. Bye bye.